Hey everybody, how's it going? Matthew Kadish here, author of the Earthman Jack Space Saga, available on Amazon.com. And today I got some really exciting news that kind of bridges the gap between tabletop gaming, video gaming, and television. And that is that Warhammer 40,000 is getting a live action TV show. And this is really exciting for me as a Warhammer fan. Warhammer is probably one of the biggest fantasy IPs out there, and Warhammer 40,000 is the science fiction version of that. So you get the best of both worlds with this one. But basically, this article on Gizmodo tells us that the creator of Man in the High Castle, which is Amazon's original series adapting Philip K. Dick's alternate history story, is bringing Warhammer 40,000 to live-action TV. The grim, dark future of the 41st millennium is coming to live-action television for the first time, and Games Workshop has recruited the creator behind Amazon's Man in the High Castle adaptation, Frank Spotnitz, to do so. Announced today by the wardens of the Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Age of Sigmar tabletop gaming franchises, and the vast multimedia empire of books, comics, games, and other adaptations behind them, Spotnitz's Big Light Productions will helm a live-action TV show based around the character of Gregor Eisenhorn. Eisenhorn isn't one of the giant, armor-clad space marines that defend the human empire of the gory 41st millennium Warhammer 40,000 is set in. Instead, he's an inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, a free-roaming agent of the God Emperor of Mankind that goes about hunting down the taint of daemons and other alien influences from humanity and its vast but ever-dwindling Imperium. Created in 2001 by writer Dan Abnett, initially for a series of Warhammer 40k novels, Eisenhorn and his motley retinue of fellow Inquisitors have become some of the most beloved characters in a vast lore of the tabletop franchise, spawning spin-off video games, audio dramas, comics, and, as it is Games Workshop, some rather pricey but lovely models. Spotnitz will serve as both showrunner and executive producer on the series, alongside Big Light Productions creative director Emily Feller, which has only recently entered development, as this gleefully silly flowchart explanation explains. And we got a little flowchart here, which you really don't need to know anything about. There's probably less giant cathedral ships of mass destruction involved in making TV, though, only guessing on that front. It's far from Games Workshop's first attempt to spin off its beloved tabletop series into the realm of cinema. Abnett himself penned the script for the 2010 animated Space Marine movie Ultramarines, a Warhammer 40,000 movie, and more recently the company recruited a 40k fan filmmaker, Richard Boylan, to produce a new animated web series about the Blood Angels chapter of Space Marines. But even compared to those projects, this is a massive undertaking for Warhammer 40k's presence beyond the miniature battlefields it has called home for decades. We'll bring you more on Games Workshop and Spotnitz's plans for Eisenhorn as and when we learn it. So this is pretty exciting stuff. It sounds like this upcoming TV series has a very definite kind of vision, and I'm really excited to see some pretty epic science fiction stuff coming to TV. So let's try to unpack this just a little bit. So the guy who they're talking about here, Frank Spotnitz, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this name, Spotnitz, he was the guy who basically brought you Man in the High Castle, which is an Amazon original series. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Man in the High Castle, it's basically like an alternate history show where it says what happened if the Nazis and Imperial Japan won World War II. What would the world be like? And it's kind of a mind-bending type show because it's based on a Philip K. Dick short story or book. Forgive me, I haven't read it. But basically, in addition to its premise, what if the Nazis won World War II? The show is about, this multiverse. And there are these films that somehow make their way from the multiverse into this one universe. And they kind of tell people, hey, there are better versions of reality out there that you can be a part of if you're willing to fight for it. So it's kind of an interesting kind of cerebral take on alternate history stuff. And I actually really enjoyed the first season, but I couldn't get into the second season. I believe there are 3 seasons out, and I believe there's a 4th season plan that's going to wrap up the series. But I haven't really caught up with it yet. But I did really enjoy the first season, and that was thanks to Frank Spotnitz, who was the guy who basically produced it. And this guy, Spotnitz, he spent like 15 years trying to get Man in the High Castle turned into a TV show or a movie or something like that. And it wasn't until he was able to team up with Tony Scott and Amazon Studios that he was able to make it a reality. Now, one of the interesting things to note here is that Spotnitz basically kind of left, aka got fired from his producing duties on Man in the High Castle right before the second season. And both Amazon and Spotnitz have been kind of vague over the cause of this, but it was basically stated to be creative differences. Basically, he wanted to do stuff in season 2 that Amazon maybe didn't want to pay for or wasn't really on board with. And so eventually he ended up stepping away. And there was some reports that basically during the first season of shooting for Man in the High Castle, it was being shot in Montreal, I believe. And Spotnitz's production company was based out of the UK. And at the same time, he was also overseeing the production of a series on the Medici family, which stars, Robb Stark from Game of Thrones. I believe it's available on Netflix right now, possibly even Amazon. But he was kind of focused more on that series because it was just closer to like where he lived than the Man in the High Castle over in Montreal. And so there were kind of reports that because he was like an absentee showrunner, the production on Man in the High Castle was a little bit difficult. And I think Amazon might have kind of resented the fact that he was kind of like splitting his his attention on producing duties between 2 shows at the same time. And that might have created some bad blood there. But basically, long story short, he ended up stepping away from his producing duties on Man in the High Castle, and it went off to a new showrunner who I guess didn't quite have the passion or the know-how to really, kind of pick up from where he left off. But by all accounts, Spotnitz is a very talented, showrunner. He's a very talented storyteller, and he's a guy who I think is probably going to be able to take the Warhammer 40k universe and translate it to the small screen. Now, another question is, where is this TV show going to land? And from the looks of things, my guess is that it's probably going to be a streaming service original of some type. Now, we know that Spotnitz has a previous relationship with Amazon, but, considering the way things went with Man in the High Castle, there's a good chance that that's not going to be continuing. So because he's based in the UK, it could be a BBC show, HBO, BBC, kind of co-production. It might be something that ends up on some of these new services, like for instance HBO Max could very well end up there. I doubt it'll be a Disney property, somewhere on Hulu or Disney Plus that's coming out. But I think it's a safe bet to say that a lot of these streaming services are going to be starving for content, and so this type of thing might be something that's exactly up their alley. Now, ideally, this would be a perfect fit for Netflix because they have kind of like a long history of doing really good, gritty sci-fi, and they definitely have the money to kind of give it the budget that it would need to do this right. So I really think the only 2 networks that could probably do this IP justice are either Netflix or HBO, and I think that those are going to be the networks that we see this come up on. But, you don't know until it happens. So we'll see how this this kind of plays out. It looks like it's going to be like a 10-episode type original series type thing. And I'm excited. I really enjoy the Warhammer mythology. I really enjoy the Warhammer universe. And because there's such a bevy of fantasy-based stuff coming out, like you got Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones spinoff, you have The Wheel of Time, You've got all this stuff that's coming out. The Witcher, it's all fantasy based. And it's good to see kind of a science fiction based show get into the mix there, because as a fan of science fiction and as a writer of science fiction, this is right up my alley. So this should be good. And I like the fact that it's focusing on a specific character who does, has a specific role in the mythos. And I think it could very well be a really interesting series when it comes out. So what do you guys think of this news? Are you a Warhammer 40k fan? Are you excited to see this as a live-action TV show? Where do you think it's going to end up? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel for more movie, TV, and entertainment news. This is Matthew Kadish, and I'll see you guys in the next video.